We're at 409 South Main Street, house recently purchased by Ann and Joseph Studholm. Next to this house is Ettra Road, which goes to what used to be called Milford, and also the community of Ettra. It was also known as a turnpike because for many years the roads like Ettra Road was actually a toll road. So there was a toll booth not far from here where people would have to pay a toll to be able to get to what was Milford and Bryanville. Prior to the building of this house, there was another house that was referred to as a mansion, so it was quite large, but nowhere near the size of this house. We're not 100% sure whether that house was moved somewhere or raised, but my assumption was that it was raised because we would probably know if it was located somewhere close. The house that had been moved was built by a Reverend Asher, and he was a minister in town in the 1840s, and sadly he had 3 children that all drowned in the ponds, which are now what we know as Meadow Lakes, all 3 falling through the ice at two different occasions. Mr. Asher Moore moved from this house in the 1850s, 1851, after his children had died. This property was part of a 64-acre orchard, apple orchards and peach orchards. 200 yards from here, there's now a street that's called Orchard Avenue, and that's the reason it's called Orchard Avenue, is because of the orchards that were there. After Asher Moore left Hightstown, the 64 acres was purchased by John C. Ward. John C. Ward is pretty well known for those that have been around here for a while because you drive on Ward Street, both East Ward and West Ward. And John C. Ward also owned what we currently know as Petty School, almost in its entirety. As a matter of fact, there is still a Ward burial ground in the northern part of the Petty campus right next to the Art Center. Mr. Ward also gave the land that the elementary school on Mercer Street, and gave a large amount of the land that Petty's on. He sold some of it first, but then sold it to them afterwards. Ward had first sold the property to Van Nest, Abraham Van Nest, before John and Mary Pommier had purchased it, built in 1881. But John and Mary Pommier had purchased the estate and the house that I had mentioned before that was raised. This house, the contractor who built it was a fellow named George Pearson, and Mr. Pommier owned a building supply business, we'd call it today, a lumber yard and supply house in Hightstown that was very, very successful. So this house that we're looking at now was built in 1881, and as we can see, it is a multi-styled house. Some would drive around, see a house like this, say it's a Victorian style, etc. That's not correct. Actually, it has multiple styles. It's a Second Empire style, which came by the name of when Napoleon III in the 1852 to 1870. Also, at the top, the 3rd floor is a mansard roof, but with the dormer windows in it, it's known as an Eastlake style. And Eastlake, you would think would be named after a lake somewhere, but it's not. It's named after an architect whose name is Charles Locke Eastlake. On the interior, there's also multiple styles. A Second Empire, which we've seen on the exterior, but also Italian finishes on the inside. The banisters, the balusters, etc. So it's a very unique house. I posit that Pommier did this as sort of a showroom for his lumber business because of selling houses and siding and things like that. Rather than sticking to one style, he could bring customers and show them all the different styles. That's my theory. So it was just kept in an estate for a few years before the Wilsons bought it in 1918. They resided here for a number of years until they sold it to Petty after his death in 1941. During that period of time, Petty owned a lot of houses that were not in the quadrant of the main campus. The houses tended to continue to be called by the name of the owner that had sold it to Petty. In this case, this was always known as Wilson House. In 1972, it started to be very difficult for boarding schools to be able to safely maintain frame houses such as this. This was first a faculty house, but then shortly thereafter, they changed the second floor and the third floor to a boys' dorm specifically for senior boys at Petty. Main housemaster for that period of time was the athletic director named William Thompson. Probably a good thing because he could control senior boys better than probably an English teacher could. He had three sons, and so it fit in as well. Up on the mansard roof, between the second and third floor, is a box gutter, and I happened to live across the street, I still do when I was being brought up, and I would watch the senior boys run quickly or walk quickly around that box gutter, and they would do time trials and time each other to see who could go the fastest. I never remember anybody falling, but it was a little scary for me watching it. When Petty did sell the house in 1972 because they could not keep up these type of properties as dorms anymore due to fire escapes, fire alarms, those types of concerns, they offered these off-campus houses to their faculty members first. And one of them's name was John Edgar. What he did is he split it into two apartments. The first floor, and then the second and third floor was a apartment. I was not his first tenant, but his second tenant. So my wife and I actually rented here from 1973 to 1975 on the first floor from Mr. Edgar. Mr. Edgar then sold it to a Martin and Ann Waldron. Martin Waldron was actually the editor of the New Jersey section of the Sunday New York Times, and his wife Ann wrote children's books, Ann Waldron. And interesting enough is that this, when it was actually built first, was not in the borough of Hightstown. We know today the borough of Hightstown goes all the way out to Petty Golf Course, but the borough line actually stopped right here at Etcher Road. So that's the story of the house. The town is very happy to have the stud homes here. They've fallen in love with it. Ann's father lives in Meadow Lakes, right up the road, and so they've passed here many times from their previous home in Princeton to visit her dad, and as she said, she couldn't get this house out of her mind. So now it may be driving her out of her mind. However, we're very happy that the stud homes are here.